There are several different ways to resolve your workers' compensation claim in North Carolina. There are two common ways. One is through what's called a Form 26A, permanent partial disability settlement. Basically, what happens in that scenario is someone is injured on the job. Let's say that they injure their rotator cuff. They have to have surgery to their shoulder. They are out of work for 3 months, and then they are put back on light duty with their employer. They go back to light duty with their employer. They are participating in light duty employment and going to physical therapy. Ultimately, at 6 months after their surgery, the doctor says, I think you are what's called maximum medical improvement. I think you are ready to return back to work full duty, and I'm going to assign a permanent partial disability rating of 10% to the shoulder. That claim will more likely than not be resolved on a Form 26A. And what that means is that a document will be submitted to the Industrial Commission in order to resolve your workers' compensation claim. Now, the Form 26A will establish a monetary compensation based upon that 10% rating, which will ultimately be 24 weeks of whatever your compensation rate is. That will be submitted to the Industrial Commission. And if you have a full duty release, it is assumed that you have returned back to work with your employer and that you are making the same wages that you were prior to your injury. If your claim resolves in that manner, then you will continue on. You will receive the 24 weeks of your compensation as a result of the settlement of the workers' compensation, and your claim will remain open for further additional medical treatment or a change in your ability to substantial change of condition is what we call it, to where you can reopen your claim within 2 years from the last date of compensation paid. So in that situation, you would not have to resign your job because you were able to go back to doing your full duty employment, making the same or similar wages. The other way that we see very common in workers' compensation to claim to resolve is through a clincher agreement or a compromise settlement agreement, which is ultimately approved by the Industrial Commission. A compromise settlement agreement usually is utilized if the claim was denied for whatever reason, or the injured employee is no longer able to return back to their employer for whatever reason. So in those circumstances, it's a situation where the employee who's injured, if they have permanent restrictions and they can't go back to their previous duty position, or if for some reason they no longer work for the employer, whether they were out of work for too long and ultimately lost their job, or, as I said, if the claim was denied and no benefits were paid, those are scenarios that you usually do see a resignation and release. So we commonly associate, if you're using a Form 26A, more likely than not, you're not going to have to resign your job. If you're utilizing a clincher agreement for one of those three reasons that I just described, then more likely than not, you are going to have a resignation and release. And the reason is very simple. It's you couldn't go back to the employer. So it is a situation where the injured employee, they go their way, and then the employer goes their way. And all issues are resolved through the resignation and release and through the compromise settlement agreement that's approved by the Industrial Commission.